Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 30, titled The Betrayer, is unlike any other episode of the anime. This week's episode had over 12 minutes of anime exclusive scenes which were weaved into manga content from chapters 618 to 620. We even ended the episode with a post-credit scene that included a manga panel from chapter 626, which had really taken me by surprise. Now, I was really happy that this episode started by adapting some panels of the manga from chapter 617, which were left out from last week's episode. In addition to being faithful to the manga, there are so many additions in this latest episode, like the proper extended fight sequence between Ichigo and Uryu, and we don't just get a few clashes here. Their fight actually has tons of new anime exclusive dialogue that isn't in the manga, and we even get our first look at Uryu's holy form, something that also wasn't shown in the manga. The new scenes involving Uryu really conveyed his motivations and his reasoning for following Yhwach, and it convinces us of his motives and his role as the betrayer. Orihime, Ganju, and Chad, the dangerous trio who were sidelined in the manga, also got a lot more screen time this week, as we saw several original scenes of them confronting the Schutzstaffel. This episode also featured new scenes of Squad 12 and Urahara commenting on the situation, with reactions from the Shinigami at the lab who are concerned about Ukitake. As you can tell, there is so much for us to talk about with this latest episode of Bleach, so be sure to stick around until the very end of the video, because there are some major changes with the sequence of events in this episode which may impact the next two episodes of the anime. Lastly, I'm going to refrain from talking about scenes which are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'll solely be focusing on what has been cut, changed, and added to the anime. We got really tired of the same old boring anime shirts, so we decided to launch Getsuga.com with the aim of creating designs inspired by our favorite anime and manga. We came up with designs that look cool and represent all of our favorite stories. Check out the latest Instinct collection, which features some amazing designs like this Frosted Heavens design inspired by Toshiro Hitsugaya, or this Instinct design inspired by Hollow Ichigo, and my personal favorite, which is the Heart design, which was inspired by Ukiura Shifa. Do not miss out, go to Getsuga.com and wear your favorite stories. Episode 30 begins with recapping adapting content from chapter 616 and 617, which was adapted into last week's episode. Now, a few panels which were not adapted in episode 29 have been included in the recap of this episode, and this is dialogue from page 10 of chapter 617, where Yhwach questions why the right arm of the Soul King is getting in the way. Following the opening, we get content from page 9 of chapter 618, which is adapted, and there's also this anime exclusive edition of Yhwach releasing this dark, ominous spiritual pressure which paralyzes everybody with fear. Now, we can't confirm whether if this is a new ability from Yhwach or if it's just him releasing his spiritual pressure. So there is a brief anime only moment here where Yhwach clashes with Mimihagi, with Ichigo telling him to stop, and then Yoruichi says some dialogue here from page 12, which is a bit later in the chapter, and this is rearranged and said earlier in this moment. In the anime, she says it right before Ichigo and Yhwach clash, while in the manga it is after they clash and right before she uses the talismans. Now, the anime has an incredible exclusive scene here where Ichigo utilizes his own Blut Vein in order to break free from Yhwach's control. This inclusion highlights that Ichigo does have control over his Quincy powers. Then following this, pages 10 to 13 of chapter 618 are faithfully adapted into the anime. Yoruichi uses sealing talismans here to maintain the existence of the Soul King, and we learn more about the 3 talismans that she uses via the mid-card of the episode. Yoruichi has some anime original dialogue here where she tells Ichigo not to let Yhwach get close to the Soul King. The dialogue between Yhwach and Ichigo from chapter 618 pages 12 to 14 was actually adapted earlier into episode 28, and this is before the Soul King was actually killed in the anime, and they included all of this dialogue here during an anime exclusive fight scene between Ichigo and Yhwach. Pages 14 to 15 of chapter 618 are slightly changed in the anime. The manga has Ichigo fire a Getsuga Tensho at Yhwach, and the smoke clears to see that he is unscathed. The anime, on the other hand, alters this by having Yhwach immediately counter the Getsuga Tensho, as Ichigo is hit before the Getsuga can be fired. Yoruichi, who is maintaining the seal on the Soul King, has some new dialogue here where she tells Yhwach that too bad the future that he foresaw will not come to pass. There are a few cut pages from the manga, and these are pages pages 15 to 17 of chapter 618. So here Ichigo is speaking to Yhwach, saying that he had told him that his blood is in him, but he clarifies that he is not going to allow Yuha to control his body because of this. Yuha explains whether or not if Ichigo will do as he wishes is entirely up to the eyes that he possesses. Pages 1 to 5 of chapter 619 are also cut, and it's more dialogue between Ichigo and Yhwach as it picks up from where we had left off, as he explains that he has never once thought of controlling Ichigo in order to do his bidding. Yuha explains that this is because he didn't need to. Ichigo will automatically do whatever Yuha wants because his will is connected to Yuha's will. So in the manga, Yhwach explains that Ichigo has always been fighting for him. The battles that he fought which had awakened his powers in a Shinigami were so that he would elevate his abilities. This elevated power had allowed Ichigo to defeat Sasuke Aizen, and then he regained the powers that he had lost from defeating Aizen, all for the sake of being able to take the life of the Soul King in front of Yhwach. Yoruichi tells Ichigo not to listen to him, as Yuha explains that without even having to think, everything is reflected in his eyes, as he sees Ichigo fighting for him, explaining that no matter what he thinks, every single thing that Ichigo does is for Yhwach's gain, all because they have the same blood flowing through them. Now the rest of chapter 619 is faithfully adapted into the anime, spanning from pages 5 to 17, with the anime reworking the first page of chapter 620 into the end of material from chapter 619. This is where Ganju loses his footing and Chad saves him, and Pernida jumps from the crumbling ground that it was standing on. We then get new dialogue which expands content from the beginning of chapter 620, with Uryu telling Ichigo and the others not to interfere with Yhwach, and Ichigo asking what is he doing. Then we get content from pages 2 to 7 of chapter 620 adapted. Then following this we get an anime exclusive tense confrontation between Ichigo and Uryu as the music wells up, and there's new dialogue here that wasn't in the manga, as Uryu tells Ichigo that if he wants to kill Yhwach then he'll have to kill him first. We then return to manga material from page 7 of chapter 620. This is where Lil, Askin and Gerard arrive, and Chad, Orihime and Ganju ready themselves to fight. There is also some new dialogue here from Pernida, who is present, and Pernida was actually not shown to confront Chad and the others in the manga, as it tells them not to underestimate the Schutzstaffel, as they are strong enough to take on 1,000 opponents. Ganju has new dialogue here where he tells Chad and Orihime to get ready to battle the Schutzstaffel. Now there's new dialogue here because these characters were pretty much off-screened in the manga, but the anime actually is giving them some screen time in this episode. So after the Schutzstaffel arrive to confront the three of them, Uryu actually has a manga panel cut from page 8 of chapter 620, and this is where he says that he doesn't need help from the Schutzstaffel. In the manga, Ichigo vs Uryu was really anticlimactic. Uryu simply fires several arrows at the ground near Ichigo, and he and the others fall from the royal palace. However, the anime takes the opportunity to showcase an original fight between them here, which expands upon the manga panels from pages 8 to 9 of chapter 620. The anime original fight begins with Ichigo deflecting several arrows, then jumping up to strike down towards Uryu, who evades the attack. There is some absolutely stunning animation here with Ichigo swinging his sword and Uryu evading the attack by ducking. Uryu then fires an arrow at Ichigo here from his hand and his foot, as Ichigo notices that he is generating these arrows without a bow. Uryu is then truly on an offensive as he fires Licht Regen while Ichigo is evading the attacks, and we then have a very fascinating addition to the anime where Ichigo is actually hit with an arrow, but his Blut Vein protects him, and this is where Uryu realizes that Ichigo can use Blut and he is shocked, and this is our first ever glimpse of Uryu realizing that Ichigo is a Quincy. While he is stunned, Ichigo strikes him down, pointing his blade at him, as he then grabs him, telling him to snap out of it. Uryu says that Ichigo had the perfect opportunity to just kill him now, but he didn't. Ichigo tries to remind him about how he had once said that Shinigami and Quincy can coexist, but Uryu explains some reasoning behind his betrayal which wasn't in the manga, as he reiterates that he is a Quincy, as he says that there is no need for Shinigami in this world, as he then activates his Volstandig. Now this is the very first time that we are seeing Uryu's holy form, and this was not shown to us in the manga. Uryu's wings are thin, refined, and they have this amazing pattern, and he has glowing armor like reishi on both of his arms and his legs, and a pattern which is resembling the end of a Quincy arrow over his heart. Looking at Uryu's holy form, it is so well designed, as Uryu here states that this is his resolve as he summons countless arrows to circle around him while he is in the air above Ichigo. The second half of this episode is almost entirely made up of anime original material, as we begin with an original scene from the lab where Ukitake's body is disturbingly shaking with Mimihagi pouring out of him. In this scene, the Squad 12 members are getting alerts from the Shutara scale as Hiyosu tells Akon that it's getting unstable. They wonder if there is another anomaly, but they detect no fluctuations causing an imbalance of souls. Urahara says that the alert that they are getting is not linked to an imbalance of souls from the three realms. He elaborates that he had heard that Mimihagi governs over stillness, and this may be the reason why the tremors have stopped and the worlds are not falling apart anymore. He does warn them that despite the right arm of the Soul King being involved, its power is linked to Ukitake's life via the Kamikake ritual. The burden of taking the place of the Soul King must be unimaginable for Ukitake, as he then says that they must hurry. The anime only scene provides a lot of context for the critical role that Ukitake is playing, as it adds a lot more depth to his sacrifice. The anime original fight between Ichigo and Uryu continues, and we see Hashward observing Uryu's newly awakened Volstandig. Ichigo is shocked by Uryu's change of appearance as he reveals that this is his new power called his holy form. He then fires these reishi projectiles which take on a similar shape to his wings, which look like the ends of an arrow with needle-like points which emerge from the edge, and they fire charged reishi towards Ichigo. Now this is some really intense clashing here as Ichigo deflects several of Uryu's attacks, but they eventually overwhelm him, knocking one of his swords out of his hand. Ichigo then takes to the sky as Uryu prepares to continue his attack. Like I mentioned earlier, Ganju, Chad and Orihime were off-screened in the manga, but the anime has several new scenes involving them here. Firstly, we have Ganju use Senpen Banka, a distraction technique where he sets off multiple fireworks to create a smokescreen. Gerard retaliates, but Orihime blocks the attack with his shield, protecting Ganju. Chad then uses his left arm of the devil, but it literally does nothing more than blow a gust of wind towards the Schutzstaffel. While Askin and Lil insult their efforts, Ganju uses Renkan Seppa Sen, which allows him to transform anything that he touches into sand. Ganju had first used this way back in chapter 87, so it's great to see him use this technique again. He actually manages to make the Schutzstaffel fall from the royal palace, but they return by using their Volstandig to fly back up and laugh in their faces. Now Lil Barrow does give them credit for thinking their strategy through, with Askin adding that if this is all of the strength that they have, then they are in serious trouble. We then have a few manga panels adapted from pages 12 to 13 of chapter 620, where Yhwach approaches the Soul King, touching the crystalline structure, but Mimihagi appears clashing with Yhwach. Now we cut briefly back to the lab for an anime original scene of Rukia saying that Ukitake is still fighting. Sentaro asks in frustration if there is anything that they can do to help him, as Isane tries to intervene, yelling that Ukitake can't go any further, but Kiyone stops her. The anime does a fantastic job of showing us Mimihagi's last stand as it tries its very best to protect the Soul King one last time. The anime exclusive fight between Ichigo and Uryu continues as Uryu's projectiles follow Ichigo through the air like homing missiles. Uryu says that he should just give up because he can't defeat him. There is some important new dialogue exchanged here which adds so much missing context which wasn't in the manga. Ichigo refuses to accept Uryu's reasoning that he has turned his back on them because he is a Quincy. Uryu says that he doesn't need his acceptance, as Ichigo asks is that a good enough reason to want to kill him. Uryu elaborates that his mentor Soken Ishida had taught him that it was possible for Shinigami and Quincy to understand each other. There was even a time where he had thought that this was true, but then he realized that this was a mistake. We then get flashbacks of the anime original scenes from Core 1 of Uryu reading his grandfather's journal. He explains that the grudge started 1,000 years ago, and the sealed Quincy King had waited for the right moment to return. Now meanwhile, the surviving Quincy were massacred by the Shinigami, including his grandfather. Uryu states that it is always the Quincy who end up shedding blood. He affirms his resolve by revealing that that he will not forgive those who have taken everything from him. He then goes on to trap Ichigo in a cage of reishi and he detonates it, and this exchange of dialogue here has done so much to improve the role of Uryu's character during this arc, in comparison to how he was portrayed within the manga, and I'm so happy that these additions are being made here via these new lines of dialogue. So the episode then begins to wrap up as we cut to more anime original content featuring Chad and the others as Gerard asks them if they are going to attack, with him confidently offering to wipe all of them out on his own. Chad summons his right arm of the giant, charging at the Quincy, who ends up swatting him away as Chad flies into Orihime and Ganju, and that's pretty much the last that we see of them in this episode. The final moments of Ichigo's anime exclusive fight with Uryu then unfold as Uryu says that he will end this, stating that here is his resolve as he draws his bow ready to fire at Ichigo. He then asks Ichigo where is his pride. Ichigo then fires a Getsuga Jujisho at Uryu, who also fires an attack back, and the Getsuga overpowers Uryu's attack, but it fires away from him. It seems like Ichigo had diverted the trajectory of the attack as Uryu calls him naive for not having the resolve to hurt him directly. We then briefly cut back to Yhwach and Mimihagi, and this clash is again expanding upon a few panels from page 13 of chapter 620, as we also see a glimpse of the Soul King here too. The final scene of Ichigo and Uryu's fight ends with Uryu saying that he won't let Ichigo kill Yhwach as he shoots down Ichigo, literally taking a chunk out of his body, leaving him to fall down from the royal palace. This scene here actually alters events from pages 10 to 11 of chapter 620. So in the manga, Uryu destroys the surface that Ichigo is standing on as he falls, and it is Lil Barrow who fires an attack which hits Ichigo while he is falling. Now because this doesn't happen in the anime, this entire exchange between Lil and Uryu is not adapted into the anime. In the manga, it was portrayed as though Uryu was showing mercy to Ichigo by only having him fall from the royal palace, but then Lil had intervened in order to deliver a killing blow. This exchange also had undertones of Lil commenting on Uryu's softness for not finishing the job. Lil comments on how Uryu had probably thought that Ichigo wouldn't survive the fall, and even if he does survive, Ichigo won't have any way of getting back up here. Lil says that there is no need to consider Ichigo finding a way to return if they kill him before he falls. Before cutting to the credits, the first half of page 12 of chapter 620 is adapted, where Gerard laughs and congratulates Uryu, saying that they have now accepted him as one of their own. The anime has an addition here where the camera pans in on Hashwald's face, who as we know was observing the entire fight against Ichigo, and the episode then cuts to the credits. Now there is a post-credit scene in this week's episode, and this is a very short scene which alters a lot of the order of events, and it begins with showing us Ukitake's convulsing body, and the rest of page 13 and 14 of chapter 620 is adapted here. In the anime, it seems like Yhwach had ripped apart Mimihagi into two pieces, while in the manga he absorbs it into his hand. We then get an anime original scene of Ukitake's body after the defeat of Mimihagi, as everyone at the lab realizes that it's the end for him. The anime then deviates from the manga here as we have a shocking anime original scene with new dialogue, as Yhwach says that the role of his father has ended and he will now reclaim the world and build it anew, telling the Schutzstaffel to offer up everything that they have as they send their reishi to Yhwach, who uses his sword to now cut the seal of the Soul King, destroying the casing housing the Soul King, as we then see the two parts of the Soul King's body float up in the air. The anime expands on a single manga panel from page 16 of chapter 620, and this is where Yhwach explains that he will take everything from the Soul King. The anime adds new dialogue explaining how he will restore the world to how it should be as Yhwach begins absorbing the Soul King, and from this post-credit scene it seems like the absorption of the Soul King is a much faster process than how it happens within the manga. The episode ends as we cut to a panel from chapter 626 of Yhwach revealing his new form after having completely absorbed the Soul King, as he awakens these multiple eyes on his head. Now this is different to the manga because in that gap between chapters 621 to 626, Yhwach was actually still absorbing the Soul King, and it wasn't a quick process. The Shinigami were in the Serete and they had time to prepare to go to the royal palace, and the Schutzstaffel members also had some downtime. The the anime must be just showing us a preview of Yhwach's Soul King absorbed form, and we may still be getting this break where Yhwach takes his time to absorb the Soul King. Due to how much stuff is being reworked within the anime, there are some cuts which have been left which may or may not be adapted into future episodes, and I think that they are worth mentioning here. So in the manga, in pages 15 to 17 of chapter 620, before Yhwach starts absorbing the Soul King, he states that he will put a lid on the Serete so that nothing can get in his way while he devours the Soul King. I do think that this may be adapted into the start of episode 31. What they may do is add these unadapted scenes at the start of the next episode while showing a brief recap of episode 30. And this is exactly what they had done at the beginning of this episode, where they adapted dialogue from chapter 617, which wasn't included in episode 29. Now, additionally, we know that episode 32 is titled The Holy Newborn, and this was from a post that was made by Kubo on his official fan club earlier this year. So content where we see the Schutzstaffel waiting for Yhwach to absorb the Soul King from chapters 625 to 626 may well be adapted into episode 32. This week's episode of Bleach was really intense, and I wasn't prepared for how much new material that we received, which expanded upon the source material. Episode 30 showed us battles that were off-screened in the manga, we had unrevealed character motivations, as well as a new transformation in the form of Uryu's Volstandig. With over 12 minutes of anime original content, it really is going to be difficult to beat this episode. Uryu's betrayal in the anime is very convincing. How he speaks about Ichigo's naive nature, his resolve to kill Ichigo versus Ichigo's mercy and his softness is perfectly portrayed here, as seeing Ichigo fall down to the Serete with that fatal wound was truly shocking. Then following this, we see the Soul King being absorbed by Yhwach, ending the episode on a solid cliffhanger for this week. The anime has done so much for Uryu's character to solidify his identity as a Quincy and his reasoning for aligning with Yhwach. This episode has given us more depth than ever before by also referencing the original scenes of Uryu reading the journal from Core 1. I really do think that Uryu has joined the side of the Quincy here, and there is something that's going to happen later on where he realizes that he is in the wrong, but for now, his betrayal has definitely convinced me, and he has done way more than he had ever done within the manga. Also, I did love the inclusion of Orihime, Chad, and Ganju getting new material. Even if the end result was the same, it still was nice to see them in action rather than them just being sidelined. Ukitake's sacrifice also has been handled exceptionally well in this anime adaptation. In the manga, Ukitake does the ritual, then we don't really see him again, and nobody reacts to his death or the fall of Mimihagi either. But the anime really did justice to his character here by showing reactions from people in the lab and seeing his body in several scenes as he struggles with the task of replacing the Soul King. Next week's episode is titled Against the Judgment, and this is actually named after chapter 623, and I'm sure that a lot of content from the lab, like Kimpachi and the Vizards appearing, as well as Urahara revealing his plan, will also be reworked into episode 31. Now we can also expect to see more of Aizen in this next episode, but for now, let me know what was your favorite anime original scene in this week's episode. Are you enjoying how Uryu's character is being fixed within the anime? Did you enjoy the anime exclusive Ichigo versus Uryu fight? I really am looking forward to reading all of your comments for this one, and lastly, thank you for making it to the end of the video, and I cannot wait to see you next week for my breakdown and analysis of episode 31 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.